Those who attended the morning session, this is a little bit continuation of it, where we have been talking about how do we imagine new build-up of partnership between North and South in a way that the South partnership and the South partner is somehow protected and highlighting the need for that to happen. We have identified a little bit of ideas around decolonization, and I know the word is a little bit too heavy sometimes, but we thought that this was the right way of saying it. And we have identified decolonization in respect to the fact that for one reason or another, the pharmaceutical industry in Africa, for many reasons, have not been able to develop a home-based research and development agenda to drive the research for products that are specifically for the African needs. And then today, this afternoon, we are going to look at the opportunity and the need or the consensus that we hope to build with all of you around the idea of a product development partnership. The product development partnership that would help us to designing a sort of a continental incubator to advance an African agenda on R&D and specifically funding R&D capacity in the private and the public sector to move with research and development for African patients, African products. So we have three outstanding speakers here with me, and who will be talking a little bit later. And this will be Mrs. Tulu Disu. She is the chair of the Communication and Marketing and Working Group and a member of the Board of Directors of the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative. She is a senior healthcare and life science professional with more than 15 years experience in biopharma. And she's serving as non-executive director of Jembe Capital, a technology-focused accelerator and angel syndicate. So she has quite a broad experience, mainly in vaccine development, and that's very important for us. The second speaker we are going to have is Dr. Moredrek Chibi. He works for the World Health Organization, the regional office in Brazzaville. And his role is coordinating implementation and transformation agenda to accelerate the implementation of WHO reforms within the African region. He's also behind the first WHO Innovation Challenge that was successfully launched in 2018, and he's really been a champion for African local manufacturing and research and development for new drugs in Africa. And then finally, we'll have Patrick Tipo, who has more than 30 years experience in vaccine manufacturing industry. He's from BioVac. He's been with BioVac for many years now, and is a founding member of the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative. And he is really a passionate champion of breaking the African cycle of dependency and reliance from vaccine from outside of Africa. So really we have been able to put up a very strong panel of discussants, apart me. And I will just, because at the end we are going to talk about the product development partnership, let me give you a couple of slides around what do we mean by it and why was that and what kind of model do we have in mind where we talk about product development partnership. So if I can have my first slide, is already here. So can I have the first slide, please? Yeah, so what is it, a product development partnership? And this is based on, current product development partnership that already exists. Patrick, you can join me here. And what is it? Product development partnership is a non-for-profit organization that develops innovative and affordable medicines, diagnostics, or vaccines for population affected by poverty-related disease. So that is what is it that we have in mind. what is the focus of this product development partnership is unmet medical needs or patient needs in the continent. And product development partnership can work all along the value chain, from early discovery up to product delivery, covering specific research gaps or full innovation cycle. And what is the product development about it is employs a portfolio approach of different products for different to R&D to accelerate product development, pursuing multiple strategies for a disease area and allowing only the most promising products to move forward. So that would be the general idea that we have about the product development partnership. And that would be, the three areas would be, one would be vaccine, one would be diagnostics, one would be new drugs. And would be really focusing on priority disease that will be identified through a common agenda over the African continent. Can I have the next slide? So just to give you an idea, I'm sorry I'm taking you from here. Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you, Patrick. Yeah. So just to give you an idea, what is... no, not this one, the other one. Okay, go one behind or one ahead. Yeah, this one. You were just, yeah, this one. So, you know what, how these ideas of product development partnership, historically, where are they and who are they and what they are doing currently? Because, you know, our model is, we are saying we want to be a product development partnership over the continent. What do we mean by that? You know, let's look at how that all started. It started in the year 2000 with the HIV crisis all over the world. And one thing that happened was that those of you that are a little bit older might remember that WHO in the last century, the model was health for all by the year 2000. So when we reached the year 2000, we realized that there was not health for all. And then suddenly even the donors and everybody realized that in order to get the health for all, we must imagine new models. And at that moment, people thought that, you know, we need new drugs, we need new vaccines, we need new diagnostics, but the industry will not do that because there is no return on that investment if it is for countries like in Africa where there is no market for it or the market. So at that moment, it has the moment where product development partnership has been created, where donors' money went into this organization whose role was to create those products in such a way that could be delivered to the countries at the price that people could afford. So by the year 2000, you know, the focus before the HIV crisis was neglected tropical disease, sleeping sickness, leishmania, even malaria. And that was when TDR, which is the tropical disease unit of WHO, has been created at that time in the 75, and then Medicine for Malaria Venture in 1999. When the HIV pandemic came past the year 2000, you know, it was the moment where people prioritized public-private mix. And public-private partnership became very popular at that time and receiving a lot of money. And then that's the time when IAVI has been created. IAVI is the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative based in New York. And then the Global Alliance for TB Drug Development, which I have been the first CEO and was launched in Cape Town in the year 2000. And then FIND came in the year 2003, and I was the first CEO of FIND at that time, and DNDi in 2003, and AREAS, which is the TB Vaccine Initiative, in 2006. Currently, there are more than 25 product development partnerships in the world. But guess what? There is not even one that is based in Africa. And all of them, they are looking at African needs, African disease, African products for the African people, but there is not even one. And when you look at even the composition in the board of the majority of these PDPs, apart from FIND when I was there, you know, where we really had the majority of Africans were there also sitting on the board, very rarely you see on the board. Of course, all these organizations have the capacity to work with African institutions and African academia, and they have a lot of capacity to do things. But they are all based there, so they all receive the money there, and then they distribute a little bit here and there, and so that's the reason. And then what we also have seen, you know, and when you look at, for example, the Global Alliance since the year 2000 to now, they have raised something like $1 billion. At FIND, in the 10 years, 11 years that I was there, we raised $250 million. I mean, this is a huge amount of money if you think about it, right? So there is a capacity that we could raise in Africa, and if we had the product development partnership here that could do. And then there is something that is important in this area is what was prioritizing solutions, which is, you know, because obviously you cannot have all this happening if you don't have funding capacity or people that would fund this initiative. And apart from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, that have been quite generous, you know. Only Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they spend around $2 billion per year in product development, partnership, and different areas, not in Africa. But then Gavi is a major funding, the global fund in the year 2002 and UNITAID 2006. So this is what is happening now. So there is no product development partnership in Africa. That's why we have been saying, you know, why is that happening and why should we not come with an idea that somehow move this towards the creation of a product development partnership. So having said that, allow me now to finish my not too brief introduction, but and call for the first speaker is Tolu. Yeah, for Tolu to talk to us about the way she sees. And what we will hear today is very much oriented around vaccine, but we'll have the possibility then at the end to discuss more about other areas of intervention. So Tolu, can you come in and give your presentation? Thank you.
Thank you, Giorgio, for the kind introduction and extending warm greetings to my fellow panelists, Patrick Tipo, my colleague at ABMI, and Dr. Maridrek Chibi. Really good to connect with you guys, albeit virtually, but that's the times that we're in. So let me go ahead and share my slides. Let me know when you can see them, please. Oops. Quite a bit on, all right. Okay. So it looks like I am sharing, but I'm not sure if you can see my slides yet.
Not yet, Tolu.
Not yet. Okay, let's try that. This is strange. Let me stop and reshare. Okay, I think what I'll do, I'll just share the actual presentation. Can you see them now? Doesn't look like it.
No, it shows that it started. It shows that it's starting to screen share, but it doesn't go beyond the blank screen. There we go.
Oh, okay, great.
There we go.
I think we're good. All right. So I'd just like to take the next couple of minutes to discuss the topic of designing an African incubator to advance an African R&D agenda. And I will basically start by setting the scene. What does the African R&D and manufacturing space look like today? And I'll touch on, you know, some of the challenges that are actually affecting the status quo and what we need to do about that from a vaccine manufacturing standpoint. And then I'll delve into some of the key mechanisms that we really need to look at to foster product development partnerships from a vaccine manufacturing standpoint, and the key elements and the key players that will be touching on that. AVMI being the front runner on tech transfer and IP, and other parties supporting the fostering of an R&D ecosystem for product development partnerships. Right, so in terms of, I'm sorry, I'm having some trouble seeing, okay, there we go, right. Now, so if we look at the R&D manufacturing for health, we can conclude that there's very low capacity in Africa, but there's high potential. We know that on the research and development side, Africa generates just 2% of global health research output. And you know, the expenditure is just about 0.4% on the continent. So this is quite low. On the development side, the story is the same. And I want to just bring two examples to sort of hone in on the fact that, yes, even though we have low research capacity, despite the fact that we account for 16% of the global population and also carry 25% of the disease burden, there's still a lot of potential. The example I want to hone on is the fact that we were able to sequence the SARS-CoV-2 genome right here in Africa, in Nigeria, at the Africa Center for Excellence for Genomics of Infectious Disease in Nigeria. And on the development side, we now have a nearly functional global mRNA technology transfer hub domiciled in Cape Town, South Africa, at Afrigen Biologics, right? So again, the potential is great. If we look at the manufacturing side, the story is very much the same. It's analogous to what we're seeing in the R&D space. What we know today is that we have less than 1% of vaccines that are actually produced on the continent. Less than 1% of vaccines that are consumed on the African continent are actually produced on the continent. And so that leaves us 99% of vaccine supply domiciled in foreign bodies and with foreign procurement mechanisms. Obviously, not sustainable. On one hand, leaves us in a very vulnerable position, but on the other hand, provides tremendous potential as it relates to the impact that a potential product development partnership can make on the African continent to supply vaccines manufacturing. So to address this intense vulnerability that we're seeing on the African continent, the African Union, really spearheaded by the African CDC, has put together a Partnerships for African Vaccines Manufacturing framework for action to really seek to address the myriad of challenges that are impacting the vaccine R&D and manufacturing space in Africa. I won't go through the entire list of challenges, but suffice it to say that the effort is really looking at closing the gaps as it relates to creating a market for the supply and demand of vaccines, ensuring that we have financial instruments that can actually help us to build manufacturing capabilities, and also making sure that the legislation and the regulatory landscape is strengthened to support this very dynamic environment. As it relates to product development, I will touch on the next two slides, what the impact of technology transfer and research and development can make on that environment. So when we're talking about product development, we know that some of the key enablers for advancing vaccines product development has to do with intellectual property and technology. If we look at the R&D side, we know that access to IP is crucial, in terms of supporting the licensing of existing new and alternative vaccine technologies. And if we also look at the manufacturing side, we know that getting local manufacturers to receive technology from established players, matching these established players with tech recipients on the ground in Africa, and facilitating the learning and the sharing of best practices to support this exchange between tech providers and tech recipients is going to be crucial in terms of fostering this environment for product development on the continent as it relates to vaccines. So in summary and in closing, if we want to talk about designing an African incubator that really looks at fostering R&D on the continent, we need to look at three elements. The first element is that we need to establish an R&D coordinating platform that really allows for the vaccines priorities and strategies to be outlined. It also allows for the sharing of know-how and collaboration, and it allows for all of this to be domiciled on one platform, right? So the coordination is going to be the very first important element for creating the ideal R&D for product development. The second key element will just have to do with setting up regional R&D centers. So spaces at regional levels where we can have collaboration of multi-stakeholders, researchers, biotechs, government, clinical research organizations, all coming together to ensure that they have the virtual and physical spaces to congregate, consolidate the infrastructure, the capabilities, the expertise that is needed for product development. So those physical spaces supported by virtual and physical collaboration is going to be important in this R&D ecosystem. And then the third element, which would really help us to connect the dots between the preclinical phase and the clinical phase, is really establishing pilot manufacturing facilities where we can ramp up the provision of these candidate vaccine drugs, and we can actually ensure that we can test and trial current good manufacturing practices at those sites. So in summary, to really create that African incubator and foster product development partnerships on the continent, in addition to having these essential elements for the R&D system, it has to be African-led, it has to be African-owned, it has to be African-initiated, and it has to be African-domiciled. And that's what we're seeing in the development of the Partnership for Africa Vaccines Manufacturing Framework for Action. And it's not just something on paper that we're trying to do. AVMI, for instance, is spearheading this effort as it relates to the technology transfer and IP. So I'm very proud to be part of that process, and looking forward to discussing more of that in the next couple of weeks. Thank you, Georgia. I'll pass on the baton back to you.
Thank you so much, Tolu. I think that was really a great presentation. I'm sure at the end we'll come back and hopefully get some input from the audience here, and we'll ask you a little bit more of questions. Can I ask now our friend Dr. Chibi from Brazzaville to join the panel discussion and give us a little bit of the perspective of the World Health Organization in terms of local manufacturing, R&D, and all what is around that, which is so close to his heart. So please, Moredrek, the floor is yours now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giorgio. just to try and confirm whether they are seeing my screen.
Yes, Mildred, we can.
Perfect. Many thanks once again, Giorgio, for suggesting this panel, and it's always nice to share the platform with colleagues that I've known for years, Patrick Tipu and Giorgio. I think we come also a long way, and also I'm very pleased to meet Tolu. So the discussion on the table is really crucial. And as WHO in the African region, we are taking it very, very serious. And impetus was drawn from COVID-19, as you all know, and everyone is singing about some of the capacity gaps that we experienced during COVID-19 when we really needed our own capacity to, save us. So what I'm just going to talk about here is some of the work that we are trying to do, but basically to try and respond to three critical questions. One around the R&D gap on the African continent. You know that, and you would agree with me that there is limited R&D products emerging from our continent, and even products that are going into clinical trials. Another important aspect is around collaboration, especially regional. There is also limited cross collaboration among our own scientists regionally, and you realize that most of the collaboration is north-south. Another aspect which I think Tolu also touched on is limited investment in R&D, which is really affecting the R&D output on the continent. So in Afro, what we are trying also to do is really to foster our leadership in that regard. So when we are looking at R&D, we very much look at it in the context of an ecosystem, because once you don't look at it through those lenses, you're actually exacerbating fragmentation. So, and we look at it from a value chain point of view. So what we try to drive R&D is really to try and contribute to agenda setting. Like I said, some of the diseases that disproportionately affect Africa are not being researched on the continent, which is really a sad kind of outlook, and would really want our own R&D scientists, our own manufacturers, really to prioritize some of the diseases that disproportionately affect our continent. One area that we also try and shape is really making sure that at the highest level, there are some sort of coordination mechanism. And that's why I'm so excited to be part of this discourse in terms of discussing the product development partnership. And this is exactly what we are also spearheading at Afro because of that fragmentation that we are seeing. And, once you are fragmented, it means you are losing an opportunity for synergies and amplifying impact. Another aspect is really to pull political commitment around our leaders and making sure that funding mechanisms, innovative financing mechanisms are also put in place to really support not only the R&D, but the entire spectrum of local production, if I may call it that way. And the most important thing is we should have confidence in what emerges from our continent in the form of products that are developed from our continent, and that policy coherence and regional procurement mechanism, and just having confidence in the products that emerge from our continent is a critical piece on the puzzle. And also, it should be a challenge to our R&D scientists to make sure that they also produce or their R&D efforts are very much informed by quality standards that are acceptable. And so it's just not a matter of I've just developed something and it should be taken up for as long as I'm an African. I think we should also aim for certain quality and standard. So besides fostering leadership and governance in the R&D manufacturing space, we also try to make sure that we provide a landscape of what is happening on the continent. And we thought this is also a critical piece of the puzzle, because I've had a number of interactions with different international colleagues from international organizations that normally ask me a question that I can't outrightly answer. They will ask me, what is the capacity for R&D in Africa? Who is doing what? Who is doing what and where? And what sort of underlying platforms are they using? And this is a simple question, but we don't really have a one-stop shop where we can really say this is the capacity and capabilities of our own R&D ecosystem in Africa. So that regional mapping of the R&D capacity, I think, is very, very critical. And once you have an idea of what is happening on the continent, you can begin now to tease out, to prioritize, to delineate certain critical pathway in terms of mapping what sort of support can be tailored to these kind of initiatives. And this can actually result in scaling up manufacturing. So the bars at the bottom there is just a way of demonstrating that establishing that collaborative network for regional scientists and innovators is very, very critical. Not only the scientists, but also mapping what sort of R&D products are in the pipeline and what sort of technological platforms are they using. And this is very, very key so that, you know, other global value chain players can come in and really strengthen some of those initiatives. And the green bars there is basically speaking to what support you can actually get from outside, because you can't do it alone. So you can build a network of now strategic partners, either regionally or even outside, you know, in terms of the value chain actors to support some of our local efforts. And once we identify a selectable, bankable R&D projects, I think we'll be in a better position to really accelerate local manufacturing of those critical products, and that can save our own people on the continent. And that's why, as WHO in the African region, we are very much in support of establishing this, BDP, this product development partnership, because we know that it's not just about the technical expertise in terms of what needs to happen, how you need to mix some molecules in a test tube, but the entire ecosystem, the funding mechanism, and the business development aspect of it is very, very critical. And the accountability mechanism that we really need to foster to making sure that we derive value and also we facilitate access, because at the end of the day, what we want to see and to experience as Africans is access to affordable quality medical products on the continent. And if we don't look at some of the R&D activities that we are doing through the lenses of access, through the lenses of quality, through the lenses of affordability, and through the access of impact, we are not doing ourselves a favor. I think we do have the potential as a continent to demonstrate to the entire world that we can do it, and I've seen it with the nascent activities that are actually happening on the continent. I do have confidence that Africa can emerge as one of the superpowers when it comes to generating its own knowledge for the benefit of our own people. Giorgio, I think let me end here, then we can have a discussion afterwards. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Moredrek. This was, again, quite a top presentation, and congratulations to you and to WHO Afro. And really, it's how much important is your convening power and your convening capacity in setting up agenda, and your personal, but also institutional support toward capacity for local manufacturing in Africa, but mainly on R&D. And when you talk about the platform to mobilize resources, I think that's exactly what we are talking about when we say a product development partnership. Even so, I see this as a very great presentation. Thank you very much, and we'll come back to you, I'm sure, with some questions. Now let me introduce our final speaker, Patrick Tipo, who will talk to us about how private sector can be involved in all what we discussed so far, and how private sector can also be a leader and innovator in looking at product development partnerships. So Patrick, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Giorgio. So I think we've got a good perspective of what could be considered product development partnerships at more of a macro, multilateral level. But I also want to focus for a moment on what could be considered bilateral product development partnerships, where the locus of control is not at a regional level, it's not even at a country level sometimes, but it's at the company level, and what can be achieved when one sets out on this path forward. Just waiting for my slides. Excellent. So I'm from BioVac, based in Cape Town, South Africa. That's a snapshot of where we're based with Devil's Peak, and if you look very, very closely, you can see UCT on the slopes of the mountain there. And BioVac is a little spot towards the center, just the bottom of center, with a couple of white buildings. So what we've managed to do over the last while, since being established in 2003, together with a focus on building vaccine manufacturing capability, we have focused on building vaccine product development capability. And I think that there were many voices out there at the time saying this is absolutely foolish. It's difficult enough focusing on vaccine manufacturing on its own, and for a small startup with very little money and very little everything, you want to do vaccine R&D as well. And in our naivety, we said yes, and nothing's going to stop us. We were very naive at the time. But I think that through blood, sweat and tears and a couple of occasions where the ball bounced correctly for us, we have managed to create a pathway forward that has delivered a capability that does not exist currently elsewhere in Africa. Our focus has been on bacterial conjugate vaccines, largely. And this diagram explains that at a very high level. We started off with developing a technology for what is a Hib conjugate vaccine, Haemophilus influenza B, which is part of many of the expanded program for immunizations across Africa and in other parts of the world. That afforded us an opportunity to take the next step and focus our attention on assisting with the development of a pneumoconjugate vaccine. Now, you might know the Pfizer vaccine and many other vaccines in the pneumoconjugate field have been developed, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. What we also had the opportunity to do was to focus on technology demonstration projects with 2 international partners on E. coli recombinant vaccines. And then the last project on the scheme highlights our efforts on the development of a novel Group B Streptococcus vaccine. So you can see how we moved from left to right, starting with something that was licensed already out there, but we couldn't access that technology, so we had to develop it ourselves, and then moving to the left, where we moved into a space where we were playing, where others were playing as well, and that's in the field of novel vaccine development, because there is no current vaccine against Group B Streptococcus. So, so where does this intersect with international product development partnerships? So the first opportunity was an arrangement we had with a company called Bionet Asia, and together we developed the Haemophilus influenza B technology package, which we then later out-licensed, and there's very little talk of technology transfers in Africa going out of Africa. There's a lot of talk about coming into Africa. So I'd really like to highlight this and spotlight this, that we managed to out-license this technology to 3 companies, 2 in Asia and one in the US. And one of these companies has taken the technology, scaled it up, incorporated the Haemophilus influenza B into a combination vaccine, a pentavalent vaccine, and that vaccine now is WHO pre-qualified and supplied to many parts of the world, supported by Gavi through UNICEF. The second project on the pneumo side, that was a partnership with PATH. It was our first relationship with them, and they approached us because of what we had done with HIB. And what we were asked to do was to assist the Chengdu Institute of Biological Products in China. They were working on a pneumoconjugate vaccine, and they needed some assistance with some of the unit processes, process optimization and development, which we did. We transferred those technology packages to them, and we trained their scientists for 2 or 3 weeks within our facilities many years ago. And then these recombinant vaccine projects, as I said earlier, these were technology demonstration projects, really as a positioning exercise, where BioVac was seeking these partnerships because of the interest in these candidates. The one as an HIV/AIDS vaccine candidate, and the other, ID93, is a TB vaccine candidate with the Infectious Disease Research Institute in the US. The idea being that at small scale, under non-GMP conditions, we would demonstrate our ability to absorb the technology, so that if these projects advanced into further into clinical development, we could then become a partner for the manufacture of the clinical trial material, and then later on possibly commercialize the products as well. And this was the GBS project, was our biggest project to date. This was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It was project managed and supported by PATH, and it was a partnership with a tech company in the US called Inventprise. So I paint this picture to demonstrate that capability is being built, has been built, and now we have to ensure that this is advanced going forward beyond only BioVac. But at BioVac, we're also wanting to expand this base even further. And we have this opportunity now through the mRNA Technology Hub established by WHO, which many people have referred to during the course of the talks at this conference. It's constituted by a number of partners, which are listed there, and obviously BioVac's one of them. Afrigen currently is at the heart of this. They're the hub of the mRNA technology platform. And the idea is that they will transfer the technology at a certain stage to BioVac. One of the take-home messages here is that there are 2 ways of setting up a technology transfer. Bilaterally, which is the way companies normally do it. But WHO, together with the Medicines Patent Pool, have created this sort of multilateral technology transfer technology hub, and they have what is called a hub and spoke model. And so here's an opportunity for technology to come in at one end, be developed, demonstrated through a commercial partner like BioVac, and then disseminated to multiple spokes within lower middle income countries. So what is our involvement as BioVac with the hub? So those red arrows are the segments that BioVac is responsible for. So Afrigen at the bottom is responsible for the process development, the analytical method development at small scale. They will also manufacture at small scale clinical trial material to take into phase 1 clinical trial, and they'll be responsible for the execution of the phase 1 clinical trial, and then they have to transfer to BioVac. We will then take that technology, first establish the assays within our product development facilities, then establish the process and the elements of the process that we need to focus on. It's the manufacture of the plasmid DNA, the manufacture of the mRNA, and the manufacture of the lipid nanoparticles, which we've read about over and over again in the media, and then go on to scale that up, and until we get to what we call the engineering batches. And the engineering batches is really the proof of concept at scale. Before initiating the manufacture of the clinical trial material, which will allow us then to take this into what is called the pivotal study, which is a clinical study, normally a large study, that allows us to collect the clinical data in the field to support licensure. Licensure will be within South Africa through SAHPRA. Once that is established, then we transfer the technology package back to Afrigen and MPP and WHO, and they have the responsibility of then disseminating that with BioVac support to multiple spokes, as I've mentioned before. So I think that's where I end, Giorgio. But the take-home message here is that this capacity is being built. We need to leverage this to expand it, not only within BioVac, and we have plans to do that. We're going to be launching another project soon, once we get the funding agreements in place in the next month or two. But it needs to be beyond South Africa. We need multiple centers where these activities are being established and these projects are being worked on. And I think that there are opportunities at BioVac and others, and we're talking to many partners about opportunities for bringing in internships and apprenticeships, so that the workforce can be developed on the back of the projects running through the pipeline. Thanks, Georgia.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I think, yeah, this is excellent again, you know, having a really excellent presentation this evening. And, you know, this really speaks to the fact that, you know, the private sector is ready. I mean, there is a lot of capacity in Africa, in particular in South Africa, but as Patrick said, it is time now to make sure that there is not only South Africa, but other countries in Africa can come, and with the support of WHO, the African CDC, and hopefully of this new African product development partnership that we would like to establish, will have also the capacity to come into the same success story as BioVac. Really, we have only to congratulate you and your team at BioVac for all what you have achieved. I mean, it's really outstanding. South Africa has been quite an important player during the COVID and even in the development of new vaccines, and you are really very much in that. So let me just tell you a little bit before I would ask then our floor to ask questions to the speaker, just to conclude my part of it. So just to tell you what the vision is about this. The vision is that we would like to develop a long-term, focused, well-coordinated, Africa-initiated, Africa-led research and development group targeting the highest ministerial level in Africa, which is WHO Afro, African CDC, the African Union, corporate bodies, African philanthropies, major stakeholders and private sectors, just like what we have said now. And the mission would be really to start developing strategy to address the product pipelines, both vaccine, diagnostics, and drugs, diversifying the players, establishing regional biotechnology hub centers in Africa to encourage spin-off from academia and small research people to come up with brilliant ideas and have the capacity and the funds to develop that into new products. And that's what and also building, just like what happened with BioVac, hopefully in other African countries also, a genuine local ownership of these projects through effective partnership, effective communication, just like BioVac has just shown us so successfully. So from this side is we conclude our different presentation, but I would like to open the floor for any question you would have for Tolu, for Dr. Moredrek, or for Patrick here. Do you, please, the floor is yours now. I think there are not very many questions, not many hands up, so it means that, oh, there is a hand up there, please. That's great. Can you, yeah. Wow.
Hello, thank you very much for the very fantastic presentations. I have a question for BioVac. I was very taken by your company, and you said that originally you were a startup and people were telling you you can't, you have to focus on manufacturing, you can't do product development and so on. And it would have been useful to get a sense of what those early days looked like, because there are a lot of young innovators here who are thinking about that and are wanting to do product development and maybe get a sense of where you began. It might have been different in 2003 from what it is today, but really get a sense of your journey in those early days. Thank you.
I think there's one simple way to summarize this, and that it was pure chaos. And I think, you know, when you see a nice table or a chart, you think, wow, this is nice, neat and tidy, clear strategy, everything 1, 2, 3, over and done. This is the glossy version. This is the version that one can put together looking back and say, okay, this is how we stepped through it. But there were many moments during this time that BioVac had to examine itself and say, can we afford to carry the cost of paying so many people on the product development side? Because there were times when the projects died down and we had to keep things going 6 months or more at a time with the expectation that something was going to land. I didn't highlight this, but BioVac is entirely dependent on outside grant funding for its product development activities. It doesn't generate enough revenue to support R&D to any great extent. So its commitment over the years was to ensure that the staff get paid, but for the actual product activities and the equipment of the labs, etc., that was all dependent and still is dependent on outside funding. Another insight that might be useful is that one of the reasons why we focused on R&D was because BioVac is actually a private-public partnership between a private consortium and the South African government. The South African government holds 47.5% of the equity in BioVac. And when it set it up, it set out 6 strategic objectives, one of which was we had to develop R&D capacity. And that was a very bold, broad statement. None of us fully understood the implications of it, but it was a very attractive and we thought necessary goal to aim for. But the moment BioVac was established, the first question was, so what do we actually start working on? And that was a very difficult question to answer. The flavor of the month then was combination vaccines, and we thought, what we'll do is get in all the antigens from elsewhere. We will formulate it, and that will be our innovation contribution. Formulate it into our own combination vaccine, and then put it on the market. And 3 years later, it will be on the market. What happened was that we couldn't access Haemophilus influenza, and that was why we then said, well, if we can't access it, we have to develop it ourselves. So this wasn't clever thinking strategically at the time to say, this is our plan. So many of these things happened fortuitously and out of necessity. And if you're interested and you are in Cape Town sometime, you are welcome to invite yourself for a cup of coffee, and we can share some of the detail about all the things that happened, didn't happen, should have happened, all of that, because it's been a very chaotic journey, but a very rewarding one as well.
Good. I think we have another question, please.
Thank you, Program Director. My name is Daniel. I just want to ask one question to BioVac, and the second question will go to the rest of the panel. You're speaking about tech transfer. I don't think we have seen inbound tech transfer within Africa in terms of medicine between South Africa or the countries that have done it. You mentioned that you did licensing, two of Asian countries, one Indonesia, I think. Do you think there's an opportunity for your work to be replicated within Africa for the bigger impact? The last question that I have, I would like to understand the assumptions from the rest of the panel members based on the work that we've been doing, the plans that we have with regards to the future of health in Africa. If we were to say in the next 10 years, where do you think we'll be in the next 20 years? Do we have hope? If we do, what does that look like? The reason why I'm asking this question is because we are innovative people. However, we focus on the high end of the innovation. We still import the raw materials for our own innovation, meaning we do a lot of value jump, and there's a lot of gap. And that's why I'm asking the assumptions, because should anything happen like what happened during the pandemic, and we are so innovative and we think we've got the world in our hands, those key ingredients that fuel our innovation will be a challenge. I just want to get your views around that. Thank you.
Yeah, so Georgia, I'll take
please,
the one on BioVac, and then leave Tulu and Mordred to respond to the second question. So, so what I can remember from the technology transfer question is, are there examples of? There appear to be no examples of technology transfer into Africa, and I think that there have been a few. BioVac was one of the early acceptors, recipients of technology from Sanofi for the hexavalent vaccine. This is the 6-in-1 vaccine. And then after that, subsequently, from Pfizer for the PCV13, the pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, the 13-valent pneumococcal conjugate vaccine. And that allowed us to build capacity and the knowledge and the experience base within BioVac for vial filling and a pre-fill syringe filling. So we've got two vaccine filling lines at BioVac. But more than that, it allowed us to build the confidence and experience in the quality management system, having oversight from these big players who've been there and done that 1 million times already. So that was those were lessons well learned, and we're still learning those. And more recently, with COVID, you might have read in the news that BioVac also has a deal now with Pfizer for the mRNA vaccine, and that's been rolled out. So these things are happening, and they're happening elsewhere in Africa as well. But I must admit that it's almost, I think it is exclusively on what they call the drug product side of the value chain, the formulation full finish side of it. So the big gap now that we have to fill is how are we going to get technology transfers, or if it's not through technology transfers, then it must be through vaccine product development internally to plug the drug substance manufacturing. The second part of your question, if I remember correctly, was, is there an opportunity to take some of these technologies that have been developed, for example, at BioVac, and also disperse them elsewhere in Africa? Yes, definitely. So why hasn't it taken place yet? because someone has to find that it's attractive enough. And so, and that attraction is dependent on how lucrative the market is for a particular product and hence for a particular technology. And in my opinion, much of the uphill slog that we are confronted with respect to building this capacity on the continent is the lack of a market pull, or the risk to it, the uncertainty attached to it. And if that was solved tomorrow, I think the rest of it could begin to flow quite nicely in terms of all the other inputs required, which we've beaten to death already in terms of focusing on regulatory capacity, workforce development, infrastructure, etc. Thanks, Georgia.
Thank you very much. I think we, unless there is any other question? No? Yeah. Maybe Tolu and Moradrek, can you ask? Did you hear the question that have been asked, and can you make some comments or want to come in with answering part of the question, which was related to availability of raw material and the problem associated with the lack of it because of what happened, for example, during the COVID? Is that was the sense of your question, I would understand, right?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Giorgio, if you don't mind, I can come in there,
Yeah,
especially
go,
with the
Moradrek.
second part, because the first part was specific to BioVac. And also, Patrick did justice to the second part of the question anyway, because that's exactly how I was going to answer it. But just to reinforce the fact that the recipe for success in the product development and manufacturing is already there. There are countries that came from, unimaginable state. Talk of Cuba, talk of India, even China to some extent. As WHO, when I was in HQ, we generated case studies for some of what it took for countries like Cuba really to be a major player. And you realize that, like what Patrick said, demand is the greatest recipe. Once there is a demand for something, there is that political will, everything else fall into place. Incentives, skills development, also, just the fact that there is the will to make things for ourselves, and everything else can be shopped around, either regionally, internally as a country, or even from outside the continent, because we do have a strategy, we do have the will, we do have the demand for that. And COVID-19 has demonstrated that. So for me, in a nutshell, I must assure the gentleman that the future of health in Africa looks very, very great, simply because we are seeing all those elements really converging to an extent that sustainability of local manufacturing will be ensured in the future. Over to you.
I'll just add a couple of pointers, touching on the first point on what does the hope look like for Africa? Should we be hopeful as relates to actually advancing on product development? And I'll use the illustration from what we're doing within the PAVIN framework. But I think the first thing is that it's important to set a goal, and the PAVIN framework for action has done that, right? We're looking to advance from that measly 1% to 60% local vaccine production by 2040. So we have something to aspire to, or a target to aspire to, and which is considerably more than where we are today. So I think that's the first indication that there's hope. And the second indication and call to action for the rest of us as stakeholders is that we need accountability mechanisms, we need sustainability mechanisms, and we need to be able to track the progress that we're making. And so, again, the framework for action does stipulate some of these points in terms of the milestones that we're looking to achieve, 10%, 30% in the next 5 to 10 years for vaccine manufacturing. So we need to ensure that the KPIs that we're using to measure these gains are clear, they're communicated, and we can define our success and measure how we're doing. And from an accountability standpoint, this framework for action has been documented, and as stakeholders in the health R&D space, we do need to make sure that we commit to what we say we're actually going to commit to. So long as we have those mechanisms in place, then we can measure our success, and then we can also pivot or adapt as we see fit as we go through the process of actually advancing local vaccine production. And then, in terms of what our priorities should be, I think, again, the framework for action has provided some guidance on this, but we really need to be looking at, how do we meet public health needs, or as well as how do we meet market attractiveness needs. And, if we're able to address both of those priorities, then we have a win-win situation for vaccine manufacturing and drugs and therapeutics in Africa. And I think we need to look at how do we create a dynamic strategy that allows us to do technology transfers at the fill and finish level and technology transfers at the drug substance level. And we need both, because we need quick wins at the fill and finish level. We need to be able to package and distribute vaccines as needed. And then we also need the upstream, more value-adding activities at the drug substance level, so that we can address legacy diseases like measles, expanding diseases like HIV, and outbreak diseases, like Ebola, COVID, and what have you. So I think a multiple level strategy will be important, and we can work with raw materials either at the fill and finish level or at the drug substance level, depending on the target disease. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Tolu. And I think we have covered everything. Just a final thing I want to say, that very likely this Africa Product Development Partnership will be launched very soon, and hopefully the first place where it will be partially housed will be in KwaZulu-Natal, maybe at the university here in KwaZulu-Natal, where it will be its first place from where it will hopefully then flourish and be present in other African countries. So thank you very much for attending this, and thank you to the speakers. Really, all of them have been quite outstanding, and shall we give them a last round of applause? Thank you, Moradrek. Thank you, Tolu, and thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Giorgio. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Giorgio.
Bye.